Okay, so thank you for hanging in there. So yesterday we heard some of the work that ASPI is doing for the technologists and today the educators. So we now get to our final session. So I have great pleasure. I just need to admit this gentleman actually is my boss, so I'll just be careful what I'm going to say, okay? But it's great pleasure to welcome Dr. Stefan Monk. Stefan is actually the Chief Medical Officer for CA Healthcare and has been working in simulation since 1997. He's founded 2 simulation centres, both in Mainz. He's also a past president of CSAM. He's actually one of the founding members. He's written widely about simulation education and is one of the world's leading workers in physiological modelling. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Dr. Stefan Monk.
Perfect. Okay. So first of all, Mandy, thank you very much. That was very kind, a very kind introduction, and I know it's too early, but I would like to thank Mandy for playing a huge role in organizing this conference. The next thank you goes out to you because it's very late, and you're still here. So thank you very much, and I hope I can make that time a little bit useful for you. I would like to, which is a little bit counterintuitive, maybe in the end of a conference, to take a step back with you and think about what we are doing and how we are doing it, and maybe we are doing it the right way, and maybe there's time for change. And I think in some ways there is, and I would like to talk about the areas in which I think change may be useful, and where we have not completed our mission as we might have wished a while ago. So I hope this technology is going to work. I'm going to quickly jump over that. That's me. Mandy already said that. And before I continue to talk, I have a few questions to you, and maybe you can raise your hands when you look at the first question. My hospital or my organization, my country, whatever you consider to be your organization, needs more healthcare workers. Can you raise your hand, please? That's about 100% of everybody. If you feel that in your organization, medical education should be improved, and when I say medical education, that's everything in healthcare education, so not medical only. Yeah, okay, that's about 100% as well. If you talk to your friends, peers, somebody at home, and they ask you, what is your job? Would you say a sentence like, I'm working in a safety industry? Oh, okay. That's a description of what we do, right? And a way of saying that. And then if you compare healthcare to aviation, would you say there's a similar level of safety in both? No. Okay. So we have about 100% here, 100% here, and 0 here. Right? I think that's a description of healthcare. I guess you could say that's a description of our position. Mandy mentioned that I started more than 20 years ago in simulation. I don't have an official picture of me from that time. This is about 15 or 16 years old from a website we had in my university. And at that time, I was full of dreams on what we would achieve with simulation and how things would be. And it was hard for me to imagine something that would be 20 years in the future. But now, in hindsight, I can ask myself, what have we achieved? So my assumptions then certainly would have been 20 years later, so by now, we will have changed the world, basically, improved patient safety dramatically. It would be a different situation than it was. At that time, when we started these simulation centers, my thinking was, there's a mannequin, that's great, but in 20 years we will have a much better mannequin. That is going to be the tool of the future, right? It's going to have more electronics, more features, and so on. But I was only thinking about mannequins all the time. And the last thought, probably describing my mindset, was there will be simulation somehow everywhere all the time in healthcare. Everybody students, undergraduates, postgraduates, specialists, nurses, physicians, pharmacists, emergency care providers. Everybody would be involved in simulation all the time. And I think the reality is different, or at least it's not that everywhere in the world. Looking at patient safety in comparison to aviation, this is a graph of the last 40 years, and safety in aviation has increased. So the crashes, the number of people who die in aviation has gone down dramatically over 40 years. And at the same time, the position of medical errors as a cause of death has increased. So this is now, as Robert has pointed out, the third, probably, biggest reason to die are errors in healthcare. I think that's very relevant. Looking at the question of how the simulator of the future would be, I think I had that problem. I thought, I have a hammer now, so everything in the world is a nail. There's one solution that needs to fit to everything. But the future simulator may not be a simulator at all. It may be something completely different. So the simulator of the future probably does not exist. That's what I would say today, and it is unlikely to be mannequin only. And I'm sure some of these things will be recognized by you. You already mentioned that there's a shortage of healthcare workers. I travel around 100 days per year, a number of countries, obviously, and I have not been in a place where somebody would say we have enough healthcare workers. It's a global problem. It exists everywhere as a challenge. And if you look at educators in healthcare as a subset of all the clinicians that are around, that tells us if we want to do education, we take something away from that small pool already. So I think that's remarkable and something to keep in mind. We are never not busy in healthcare. There's always something to do. There are patients, emergencies, schedules, on-calls, and sometimes trainings, of course. In general, lots of healthcare systems in the world are very inefficient in many ways if you compare it to a well-oiled industry sometimes. A lot of hospitals look at their operation theaters as profit centers. So as soon as you pull somebody out, let's say a nurse, to do a training, that hurts that profit center because you take something away from that important resource. And of course, if you have a hospital, it's difficult to find space for simulation. And the question really is a hospital at all a training institution, or is it just a place to treat patients? So from my enthusiastic approach 20 years ago, I think we have achieved a number of things. So there's a lot of simulation in the world, more or less everybody, but only if you look at the continental scale, not in every country, not in every city, not in every hospital, not in every healthcare institution. I could say, well, there are lots of professional societies around simulation, and there are meetings around that, sometimes very big. There are lots of educational opportunities for simulators, and there is research and publications and so on. So if we only look at this looks like a very good situation. If I spoil a little bit our enthusiasm, I think if we compare ourselves to the aviation industry, we don't look that good. So a pilot goes through simulation every 6 months. I don't think that's organized anywhere in healthcare on a larger scale. And in aviation, there's a number of tools available for that. I will talk about that. We look very much, not only, but very much at mannequins. We don't have a legal or professional requirements to do these things very frequently. And simulation as part of lifelong learning in aviation does not stop, but it does in healthcare. So there are a lot of places where you have to do it as a student, maybe as a resident, sometimes in your career, but not all the time until you retire. I think that's a big thing. So my personal, a little bit negative view of that is, after 20 years, we did not get where I thought we would be, and it's far from perfect. I think if we agree or not agree on that. To me, that means there's room for improvement. There's something we might like to do to become better in the future. So before I go and concretely give you a few suggestions on what I think could be done, I would like to repeat a few things that I'm sure you're aware of, but they give you some context. So as you describe it at home, healthcare is not a safety industry. By definition, almost nobody would describe us like that. The traditional approach to education in healthcare today is probably not good enough, not the least because patients don't accept to be trained on so much. But we know that practice leads to better performance. We know that from our professional environment. We know it from playing the piano, for example. It's well accepted. But we don't particularly seek these opportunities maybe in healthcare. And experiential learning is what makes an expert. So somebody who has been working for a number of years in healthcare is trusted in a certain way just because he or she has worked that many years in healthcare. And we know that simulation in principle does work. So most of the publications, but I think it just makes sense in this context to talk about that. So when we know all of this, what can we do to improve the situation? That's the question that I would like to talk about a little bit. And I'm going to make 6 suggestions for all of us to think about. That's the takeaway, if you will, of this presentation. So my first experience in simulation was I have seen a simulator, and I said, that's a great tool. We need to get one. That's how simulation in my university started. There were other people who had the same thought. But there was nothing involved where they or I or somebody else said, well, there's a need for that because we want to improve quality in healthcare or something like that. That was not the case. And then when we had the simulator, I and all the others slowly realized, it's really a useful tool. It's not just a great toy. It really is something that can improve things in healthcare. After 20 years, I would say, well, before somebody goes into simulation, before you buy equipment, before you build the space, before you put together your team, it is worthwhile thinking about what you would like to fix with that system. So analyze what is needed. And the training needs analysis, I think, should be the beginning of a journey into simulation. And it's not just the beginning, it's something that should come back again and again. And not just because you want to buy something. I more see it as a circle, as a repetitive process, because your healthcare system has new challenges, it changes, patient changes, new methods are there, and you will learn new things, and maybe your quality assurance officer will let you know that there are issues, and that always requires potentially a training need, and that is something that simulation should be about. So training needs analysis is something that requires a group, a team, and it probably should include educators, but certainly quality assurance people, other stakeholders, so somebody who plays a role in the decision making. So the question now is, who is a decision maker? And I thought here in the UK I could show this example of a very old TV series, Yes Minister, as somebody who, in one way or the other, made decisions. And I think that's a relatively good description, because the question is who makes decisions. So if I ask you, and maybe you just throw answers at me, who pays for your simulation center? Would you be able to give me a name or a function? It doesn't have to be a name, but a function in your institution. So you go no? Would somebody know? Yeah. So who? So somewhere there's a fund for medical education, and somebody pays out of that fund. Who's in charge of that fund? Good question. Okay. So for me, and thank you. That's a relevant question, right? So who is the person I asked you? I probably go to my boss or somebody, but where does she go to or he go to, and then what's the next level, and so on. And the question that may be just as interesting is, in your institution, what's the problem that you might want to fix? What's wrong in your hospital? And maybe, and I don't know where you come from, so don't worry about anything, Would you know something that's less than perfect in your institution? And you, yeah, okay. Somebody who says no? So there are problems, right? That problems, these problems are something to look at. And if we think about simulation in general, if we think about education, these problems might be the thing that we want to address potentially through education. So asking yourself where the money can come from and what to do with simulation and why doing the training needs analysis, probably it's useful to look at those problems. And if you think for a moment about whoever that is, your boss, and maybe the boss of your boss, would you know what challenges them, what is important to them, what bothers them, what keeps them up at night? Would you know? You do? Somebody does?
The answer is probably not simulation.
Wow, imagine, right? So, and that's it, right? So let's say there's a CEO in the hospital. This guy probably does not get up in the morning and say, I forgot to buy the new simulator. That's probably not his first thought when he thinks about the hospital, or she thinks about the hospital, right? So there must be something else. And it could be reputation, it could be finance, it could be quality. So think along these lines when you want to talk to that person who is a decision maker and probably is the one who eventually has the money. But also there are other stakeholders. So it could be a patient safety organization, could be your colleagues, could be a politician, potentially, right? So there are a number of people who could be in there. And then when you have that problem, try to quantify it with data, something. So, we lose money because we have all these complications. That would be a simplistic example. But the data is something that you can review after you start your simulation experience. There are so many complications here. And if you believe that you can do something, right, you might want to measure complications after the introduction of simulation. So I think the training needs analysis is relevant. After that is something that's called training media specification. That means what is my tool that I want to use when I teach. The question to you here is, and maybe some of you have an idea, where does a pilot has an office, his office? Where do they, when they're not flying, what do they do? Where do they go? Where's their desk? The answer is there is no desk. A pilot does not have an office. So a professional pilot is flying or at home. That's all they do, right? So they barely see their own company. They're very self-reliant. They go fly and they go home after that. There's not much in between. Twice a year maybe they go to a simulator, but in between, when there's a training need, there are different methods to deal with it. And it's not this format. They don't go to a seminar, to a conference, into a big room with other pilots and somebody explains the next version of an engine or something like that. If there's a need for education between those sessions on the simulator, a few years ago, they probably would have read a manual or something. Today, they do e-learning, they play a game, they do things at home. So there is specific media for specific purposes. If you practice flying, you go to the flight simulator. If you are assessed in your flying skills, you go to the flight simulator. If there's anything else, if you need to read about the new engine, then you do something else, and that could be e-learning or a game. So training media specification, there's not one mannequin that addresses all the issues. And that means also in healthcare, there could be e-learning, there could be task trainers, there could be something else, not just those mannequins. There's a book about this, a number of books. This is one that describes the journey of somebody who was tasked with building a simulation program. Now, the question that I asked earlier, is a hospital a training institution, is certainly relevant for a hospital, but even for some universities it is. Going back to the aviation industry, the first of the row of 3 pictures here is Lufthansa Flight Training Center in Frankfurt. Lufthansa sells its brand based on their reputation in safety. They are expensive, they are not extremely comfortable or whatever. They say we are very safe. So they take pride in training their own pilots. For them, that's important. So this is a simulation and training center near Frankfurt. On the second picture, you see a simulation center that says Etihad, another airline. It says Etihad, but everything inside the building is CAE. So it's equipped and operated by CAE. So in this case, training education is not as dear, as close to the heart to Etihad as it maybe is to Lufthansa. And if you would like to become a pilot with EasyJet, EasyJet will tell you, great, thanks for your application. Please move over this door and go to CAE because they are the ones who train our pilots. So they have no interest in it at all. They know there are legal requirements and things they need to do, but they don't do it themselves. They outsource it completely. So I would like to put the thought in your head that you think about an institution in healthcare, would that really be the institution that needs to execute the training themselves? And one thing that I keep hearing, and I have heard it here as well, but it's an almost universal remark, is, it's good for undergraduates. It's great for the junior doctors. It's great for the beginning nurses. It's something that you do when you start your professional life. But the sharp end of the knife, where blood is flowing, where we actually harm patients and sometimes kill patients, that's when we are beyond that point of our education. We really deliver our services in one way or the other. So, I'm a physician, so 6 years was the time that I went to university, another 5 to 6 years until I was a specialist in anesthesia. So simulation would have a place there. And then I have, 40 years or something like that, in which I actually treat patients and where I'm really dangerous. And this is where less simulation is available. I think that doesn't make sense intuitively. So when you do the training needs analysis, when you think about that, don't think education simulation is for those young people. This pilot here will go through a simulator every year, twice, for his whole professional life, for his whole career. It never stops. So I think that's relevant. Increase facilitator efficiency. If we don't have enough healthcare workers in the first place, it's not a waste, but it's really a very specific way of using those people by putting them into a simulator to train maybe 3 people. That's something that is not extremely efficient. So if there's a way to increase efficiency, we should use that. And one way is to use, for example, training tools that don't require an educator, or at least that don't require an educator all the time, because these devices guide you through a training, for example. And the HoloLens that we have shown here is, in that context, is an example of increasing that efficiency, I think. I'm certainly not saying educators go away. That would not be very smart to say in this room. And it's certainly not something that we want to do, and I consider myself in that world as well. But to increase efficiency, I think that's something that we should have a very genuine interest in. And the last suggestion is, it says reduce travel time, but it really means we are lowering the threshold to simulation and education in healthcare. So traditional simulation, as we started out, was 3 people in a room as learners, a facilitator, an operator for the simulator, and maybe 2 actors playing surgeons, nurses, or whoever else would be around. And these people would train then 3 learners. So the number of facilitator, the ratio to learners was something like 1-to-1. That's not extremely efficient. The tool itself is great, but it's a very luxurious way of educating somebody. So everything that can improve that is good. And then you need a room, and then you need a simulator. And then everybody has to meet, and they have to meet at the same time in that place. So independent of emergencies, schedules, on-calls, you invite, of course, but you force people to be in that room in the same time. That's difficult to achieve in healthcare. And I'm sure you have experience where somebody says, I would love to come, but this beeper is going, and there's that phone call, and there's this emergency, so I don't have time to do that. So one way is to use conferences as opportunities to educate. This picture here is about 2 weeks old. When we were in Copenhagen, the European Society of Anesthesiology has set up a huge simulation center. So a big operating theater, fully equipped, debriefing room, audiovisual connections for everything, a technology control room, another room for ultrasound education, cameras, videos, for all of that there. And people, educators, happened to be there already because it's that big conference. And of course, first the learners have been there because it is that big conference. It's an opportunity to educate. I think to use that is attractive. And a number of larger societies do that. And of course, you can do it in your hospital, outside of the simulation center as well, but also use the other examples that I gave earlier, like e-learning, a game, something that works remotely and that does not require you to travel and go somewhere, and go only to a simulation center if it's needed. Robert, in his opening remarks, has mentioned the ASA, and I want to give you a little bit of background information to that. So a number of years ago, we were very happy because the American Board of Anesthesiology said, well, if you want to maintain your certification in anesthesia, go to a simulation session. Fantastic, right? If you are in the industry, that's fantastic. That's great news, right? You have a professional organization saying simulation works, basically. It was rejected by the anesthesiologist. Very frustrating and very counterintuitive. So what was the reason for that? Well, in the United States, 40 centers were accredited to be centers for these MOCA exams. That means that almost everybody who wants to have their recertification needed to travel. If you travel, that means you are on the road maybe for a day, then you do the simulation, and then you go back maybe another day, maybe in the evening. So 2 or 3 days you're gone. If you're gone for 2 or 3 days in the US as an anesthesiologist, you lose 2 or 3 days of income. And your hospital loses 2 or 3 days of operating theater use. So it costs money for everybody. And then, if you are in that simulation center, it's a certification process. You may fail, which is not fun. And you fail in front of your peers because the people who observe you, but also the people who go with you through that exercise, see potentially how you fail. So this makes everybody very nervous, even if you are passing. But if you fail, you are extra unhappy. After investing money, time, going there, all this embarrassment, nobody was happy about that. And the ASA basically said, we believe in simulation, but this is not working. What can we do? And this is how this idea of screen-based simulation with the ASA started. So today, that means there's a game that is approved by the American Board of Anesthesiologists. We are about to release module 3 of 5. And it's been published about. It's very popular to be played. And most people who play the game play it between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. That gives you an idea of the availability of healthcare professionals. And I think it reflects our own experience, right? So if that's the time when people have time, imagine how difficult it would be to bring all these people to a simulator. Also, the American Society of Anesthesiology has about 50,000 members. So what would be the infrastructure to support potentially up to 50,000 people move through simulation centers to run 5 exercises in 5 years? That's also difficult as an infrastructure to imagine. We know that those who play the game on average need 3 attempts to pass. So we think there's some learning going on, although it's an assessment tool. It's much cheaper than all this travel. And of course, it's also cheap, not in financial terms only, but it's also cheaper because it takes away all of that embarrassment. This does not completely replace simulation. It's more in the area of training or assessment, media specification. So I'm not saying all the other simulators can go away or should go away or need to go away, but it's a way to make use of a specific need or to address a specific need through a specific tool that's tailored specifically for that need. So I find that that is really attractive. And the answer of the anesthesiologist is, yes, we find that attractive. They just subscribe to that very, very easily. So we see those numbers, we see statistics. And by the way, it creates all the data because these people, not individually, but as a group, are observed by the system. So there is an opportunity to say, there are problems here and there are problems there. So my vision is, in the end, we are going to have a large database that says something like, in induction, 50% of the anesthesiologists have an issue with blood pressure. And resuscitation works very well, but this is an issue. So I think if we have a database like that, it turns into the next training need and a next training need after that. So I think that that is something that can help us to develop into the future. So with this, I would like to close the presentation. And I would like to remind you, training needs analysis, training media specification. Don't try to fix your issues alone, but try to fix something, right? Move away from pure academia, universities, schools, and into the clinical reality in the hospitals. Find ways to increase the efficiency of educators and try to reduce travel time. Be opportunistic, lean in your operation. Thank you very much.
Anybody have any questions for Stefan?
I think it's okay at the end of the conference, specifically.
Thank you, thank you. And very trendy from the tablet. Yeah. Okay, there you go.
Yeah, there's PowerPoint running on this, and then that's that pen. And it could have been more interactive. I wasn't sure about the connection here and so on. So if it's wireless, it's even better. So if you anyway, thank you.
Okay. Okay, just before you all escape, I've just made a little list of, this is, I feel like being mother of the bride, maybe, I don't know, some 6 huge thank yous. So firstly, I'd like to thank our wonderful team who've been streaming around the world. So yesterday we had people in Singapore watching this conference. So thank you to the guys here from Trent Clinical School. So a huge thank. I think they may have headed off, but the Preston group who drove all the way down the motorway, down the M6, for the lovely simbulance. So thank you. I've already spoken to them, but we'll do a thank you. One of my greatest fears when I teach is, will the computer and PowerPoints work? So can we say a huge thank to Mark and Chris for making all that technology work for all of our speakers? There's only 3 more to go. So number 4, hugest thanks to the keynotes, facilitators, presenters, I have to say, because this is about a human patient simulator network. So huge thank you to all of you. Number 5 of 6, we're getting there. So 3 big thank yous. Thank you to ASPE, who have been integral. Jane, particularly, who's been linking with us all the way through. This takes about a year in planning. A huge thank you to the CAE Academy. There are some undercover operatives in the audience, and to the whole of the CAE family. So huge thanks to you. Jamie and his team, there will be online evaluations, so please, as a lot of your feedback from last year, we made lots of changes for this year. I'm the only one that sees the actual responses, and I pull together a huge report. So please be honest, frank, objective. It really means a lot to us. So my final thank you is to all of you, and have a very safe journey home.